Welcome. It's good to talk with you, Rob. To everyone joining us here, this is Rob McDowell, parent of a Deerfield student, and I had heard from Rob via Facebook about his experience with COVID-19. He's got the Deerfield hat there, and came to understand that he had quite a harrowing experience with the virus. So I think without further ado, Rob, if you would just like to introduce yourself and then tell us about the last few weeks.
Thank you, Peter, and it's a pleasure to see you, and great to speak to the students and faculty and everyone at King's Academy, which I had the honor of visiting about 10 years ago when I was in government on the Federal Communications Commission. And I'm also a Deerfield alumnus, class of '81, as well as a parent member of the class of 2018. So the story with me and COVID-19 has been intense. I first came down with symptoms on March 14th. That's a Saturday here, or everywhere, I guess. And I thought it was my normal seasonal allergies with a follow-on bronchitis that I get every couple of years. And those symptoms got a little bit worse, but not anything noteworthy that's happened before in my life. So that would be more coughing, a slight fever, 99, 100 in Fahrenheit. But again, nothing too concerning. Obviously, I was aware of COVID and had been taking necessary precautions for a couple of weeks. But it was on March 17th when I learned that a house guest, a friend of my son's from college, had stayed with us March 6th, 7th, and 8th. And that on March 17th, he told us he had subsequently tested positive for COVID-19. So that got my attention, and we're grateful to him for A, getting tested, and B, letting us know, because that accelerated my going to my doctor to say, look, now officially been exposed, maybe we should get tested. And by the way, the test results weren't available for about 8 more days, and a lot happened in those 8 days. On Friday the 20th, so my fever started to yo-yo from normal to 103 to 99 to 101 to normal. So it was going up and down and up and down. Cough was getting worse. I was never alarmed. I never felt short of breath. But on the 20th of March, Friday the 20th, my doctor saw something via FaceTime that she didn't like at all. And I don't know if it was the increase of intensity and frequency of my cough. I think that was probably part of it, plus the spikiness of the fever up to 103, down to normal 101. That all added up. And she said late on the night of Friday, March 20th, you need to go to the emergency room, which I stupidly resisted. I said, I feel fine. I'm not having any trouble breathing. I'm fine. But what she didn't tell me at the time, but she told me shortly thereafter, which is with COVID, and this is an important lesson learned, there's what she called a cliff day on day 7 after the onset of symptoms. So if you are still sick 7 days after onset of symptoms and it's suspected COVID, remember I still was not officially diagnosed yet. If you have any degradation, however slight, in your condition, get to a hospital, get to someone who can treat COVID-19 and get a chest x-ray in particular, or a CT scan ideally. So that's what they did late on the night of the 20th, early in the wee hours of the 21st of March. Ended up that I had pneumonia. I've never had pneumonia before in my life. And they admitted me for that Saturday, but the next day, a doctor who was in charge of me, but who never met me and never examined me, discharged me. But much to the chagrin of my primary care physician, Dr. Connie Lee, who really is the superhero in all this. So on the night of the 22nd, she saw something she really didn't like. And I think that was an increase in my coughing. As she later told me, she said, Rob, you could not finish a sentence without coughing. So I really resisted going back to the hospital. I said, look, it's 11 o'clock at night. I don't want another all-nighter. I'm exhausted just from the last hospital stay because I was up all night. That can't be good for me either. So I went to sleep. Didn't have a great night's sleep, but nonetheless got some rest. The next morning, she again saw me over FaceTime and saw that my breathing was worse. It didn't feel worse to me. That was an interesting thing. But so she called 911. I was in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. Long story short, they took another chest x-ray. I had full-blown double pneumonia, and I was in a tailspin at that point. So apparently my lungs were filling with fluid. And the look on the faces of the doctors in the emergency room was very grave. I will always remember those looks. There was one older, very experienced emergency room doctor who kept looking at me out of the corner of his eye like, this guy's not going to make it. What I didn't know at the time was my primary care physician, after they had the results from my x-ray, told my wife that I had less than a 50% chance of survival. She later confessed to me that she thought I had maybe a 20% chance of survival at that point. The hospital was getting ready to intubate me, which is to put me on a ventilator. And I knew that that was a line in the sand that I just couldn't let.
And so this was March 23rd still, that on the second visit to the hospital, you arrived that morning, it sounds like, via ambulance. They took another chest x-ray, identified double pneumonia. Your wife had been getting some bad news that you hadn't been getting. And then what happened next?
One pulmonologist physician came in very alarmed, noticing that I was on 5 liters of oxygen. So I had the breathing tube on the bottom of my nose, the nasal cannula, as we call it over here. It ends up that me being on 5 liters was a mistake. It was just a medical mistake. Nobody took ownership over the decision to put me on 5 liters. And this is where self-advocacy can come in handy. And it wasn't adversarial at all. I was trying to foster the sense of a team here. We're all in this together, although I had a little more skin in the game than anybody else. But
it's great that you have a sense of humor about this in retrospect.
Yeah. We had to.
Yeah.
You try not to lose that if you're in that situation. But from their perspective, I was in this nosedive, and they wanted to give me as much assistance as possible. From my perspective, I knew they were panicked about how much oxygen I was on, and nobody knew why I was on 5 liters. I also knew, though, that this was the fork in the road for me, that if they're going to intubate me, odds were I was going to die. And they were basing that decision largely on my blood oxygen level. So this was do or die moment, quite literally, and was able to do it. Then throughout all this, I never had a change in medication from March 14th to March 23rd while I was going downhill. And I had those 2 cliff days, remember, on the day 7 and then day 10, which was March 23rd. The only change in medication was, and this was a gamble by my doctor and the doctors at the hospital, they were all in agreement on this, was to try hydroxychloroquine. I get out of the hospital and I find out later that it's now sort of politicized and somewhat controversial, at least in the US. So I took my first dose of that either late on the 22nd before the second hospitalization or early on the 23rd because my doctor had phoned in a prescription and we picked it up. So it probably wouldn't have taken effect really for sure until late the 23rd or the 24th. But that was the only change in my medical treatment at all. And that's right around when I began to stabilize. It was probably the wee hours of the 24th. And then I was able to pull out of the nosedive after that.
Your wife knew that from your doctor that your chances, according to your doctor, were less than 50% and might have been 20% if you'd been intubated. Were you aware of those numbers at the time?
I was not aware at all of those numbers, of those odds, and I'm grateful that I wasn't, because you need to keep a positive mindset. Not that I would have panicked, but if in reality I only had a 20%, actually I only had a 20% chance in my doctor's opinion before being intubated. And I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah, I would imagine. And then how much longer were you in the hospital before you left, or were you?
A long time. I didn't get out till April 1st, so over a week. So from the 23rd till April 1st. Yeah, so it hit me pretty hard. I'm still in solitary confinement, and will be for another day or 2 at least, just to be safe. Still have residual cough. Here it is, April 10th. I may have permanent lung damage, we're not sure. When I was brought home from the hospital on April 1st, my son, Griffin, the Deerfield alum, had to help me up the 1 flight of stairs. I had to stop 3 times on April 1st to catch my breath. I was very winded.
So that 1 week, you were admitted to the hospital on March 23rd and you left on April 1st. You mentioned earlier that your doctors are coming in once every 4 hours or so. Psychologically, that's a lot of alone time. And you mentioned that the importance of your smartphone being so that you were able to communicate with presumably family and or friends and your doctor, of course. How did you, tell us about the psychological experience of being there for a week with only your doctors, because family can't visit during that time?
Yeah, that's very tough. I mean, it helps if you're comfortable with yourself or comfortable in your own skin. I don't know how that translates into other languages, but and this is where spirituality or faith and mindfulness can all come together. I knew via Twitter and texts and other things that there were people of all faiths praying for me, for those who had a formal faith, and those who did not, were just more spiritual, were certainly trying to convey to me positive thoughts and energy. That was probably in the hundreds, maybe even thousands of people. And I get a little emotional talking about this. That gave me great comfort, strength, and resolve, knowing that was happening. And so there was a part of me saying, I can't let them down. I've got to live. So that helped tremendously.
That's a good note to finish on. Rob, I want to thank you for sharing your story. I know just hearing the experience of what this is like for what must be, what we now, as of yesterday, I think was 1.6 million people around the world with confirmed cases at this point, is quite a large number. And I'm glad you made it back from the brink. And yeah, and just want to thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you, and I hope everyone affiliated with King's Academy prospers and is healthy and safe and does well, and hopefully I'll return there someday.